Story 1, The Manhattan Beach Screams, a symphony of dread, lexically enhanced with horror, ****. I am Elias, a 28-year-old man whose existence is geographically anchored to a nondescript townhouse in the vast, sprawling outer suburbs of Los Angeles. My professional obligations are dictated by the shadows. I typically conclude my closing shifts between 10:00 and 11 p.m., leaving me a captive of the night. My hours are spent in a cycle of digital communion, gaming intensively until the dawn with my international cadre of friends. It was a monotonous, predictable treadmill of existence. Yet, a few lunar cycles ago, an acute, pervasive stress from my employment had completely eroded my desire for even this routine digital escape. Sleep, however, offered no sanctuary. I languished awake until 2:00 a.m. mindlessly absorbing content on YouTube, until a sudden, visceral urge for motion compelled me. I decided to walk. My walks were infrequent pilgrimages, yet I invariably found the nocturnal solitude deeply sedative, almost unnervingly tranquil. I savored the illusion of absolute dominion over the deserted streets, a sense of ownership that now, in retrospect, whispers of an insidious vulnerability. I pulled on a heavy hoodie, secured the primary deadbolt with a chilling finality, and embarked on my spontaneous patrol. My path was the default, leading me out of the geometric confines of the townhouses and into the older, more organic neighborhood of single-family homes. The entire district was a financially drained area. The houses were venerable, modest, and huddled close, yet the residential silence was preferable to the sterile lanes of the complex. As I advanced, the town felt suffocated by an absolute, profound stillness. Every window pane reflected the blackness, and the lack of any ambient sound was initially a comforting, profound calm, precisely the anesthetic my mind required. But my straight-line trajectory carried me inexorably towards the fringe territories, the suburbs' forgotten edge. The asphalt abruptly degraded into a narrower, winding passage, which plunged into a region of highly isolated, deeply recessed houses swallowed by an aggressively dense woodland. Only the occasional, sickly yellow glow of a porch lamp hinted at human occupation, the structures themselves hidden in the pervasive gloom. The atmosphere shifted from tranquil to palpably menacing, yet a darker curiosity propelled me forward. I had covered perhaps a kilometer when the silence was savagely lacerated by a sudden, jarring scream. It was a starkly masculine cry, but devoid of the desperation of a plea for help. It possessed a strange, directional intensity, a noise meant to mark something. In the echo chamber of the silent forest, the sound was distorted and magnified, seeming to ripple from multiple, ambiguous vectors. I became instantly immobile, my senses straining against the darkness, but the road was vacant. After 30 seconds of agonizing quiet, I resumed my march, deeming the source unsolvable and opting for deliberate ignorance. Even without the auditory intrusion, the road began to exert an escalating psychological pressure. The streetlights were sickly and distant, their feeble illumination barely conquering the night. The few visible houses were grim relics, exhibiting a severe state of architectural decay and abandonment. The very road surface was deteriorating, suggesting its use had long been surrendered to nature. I knew the town had areas of blight, but this segment felt utterly submerged in neglect. My initial disquiet deepened into a genuine apprehension that I was trespassing through a truly derelict neighborhood, and the isolation of the deep night amplified the risk. Then, the scream returned. It was a near-perfect mimicry of the first, but now undeniably closer and, terrifyingly, radiating from behind me. I spun around, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. The road behind was a tunnel of faint, useless light. The silence that followed the scream was thick, a living thing. Every subtle movement in the surrounding shadows triggered a spike of absolute paranoia. I instantly realized the necessity of retreat. I had no navigational certainty here, no guarantee of a loop back to my area. Retracing my steps was the sole viable option, despite the unsettling proximity of the unseen screamer. I turned and began to move with a desperate velocity, my vision fused to the road, striving to eject myself from the suffocating embrace of the woods. After only a couple of minutes of hard walking, the scream struck a third time. It emanated definitively from behind me, confirming that the source was now operating within the territory I had just traversed. I had clearly walked past this individual, who must have been actively concealed within the dense curtain of trees. I risked a panicked glance backward and saw a solitary male figure occupying the road. He was cloaked in uniform dark or absolute black clothing and was moving purposefully toward me. I allowed myself only a fractional second of observation before frantically accelerating my escape. This scenario was entirely outside the bounds of any rational explanation. I instinctively knew that any prolonged confrontation would carry an unthinkable cost. I looked back several more times as I ran, but despite the figure's initial presence, the road was now consistently void of any human form. Where in the physical world had he gone? Had he vanished back into the primordial darkness? I clung to the hopeful but unlikely theory that he had spotted me looking and had retreated to avoid appearing predatory. My only imperative was immediate, decisive flight. I soon burst free of the bizarre, wooded threshold and back into the domain of familiar homes. Even here, however, the suffocating solitude endured, replaced now by the gnawing conviction that I was not, and had not been, alone. I finally reached the comparative sanctuary of my townhouse. The walk had been a poor substitute for stress relief, but I was intensely relieved to be clear of that desolate zone and the mystery of its vocal occupant. I entered the kitchen for water and settled at the counter, attempting to regain my composure. That fragile peace was instantly shattered by a faint, grinding shuffle outside my front door, followed by a sudden, authoritative, heavy knock. I launched myself from the chair and moved with extreme stealth toward the entrance. First, I pressed my ear to the wood, discerning only my own labored breathing, then I cautiously peered through the tiny viewport. My porch light was extinguished, plunging the area into inviolable blackness. I could only just make out an imposing, dark silhouette. After a few seconds of intense visual triangulation, I was virtually certain of the dark clothing. My worst fear solidified, it was the same man from the road. He had meticulously tracked me home. I retreated, snatching my phone to initiate a whispered call to 911, struggling to keep my voice from betraying my terror. My objective was simple, to keep him outside, a subject for the arriving police, hoping to finally exorcise the sinister questions the screams in the woods had raised. The figure outside delivered 5 or 6 more deliberate, resonant raps on the door while I was connected to the dispatcher. Then, the silence resumed. I risked a final look, he was gone. The officers conducted a brief inquiry upon arrival, but the incident produced no actionable leads. I detailed the repetitive screams, and while the police conceded the narrative was peculiar, they declined to commit resources to investigating ambient woodland noise. Sleep was impossible that night. While the direct terror subsided, a new form of torment began. For the next month, I was routinely awakened by loud, jarring, and deeply hostile knocks at the front door. Yet, every time I scrambled down to look, the area was empty. It has been a lengthy reprieve since his last visit, but a profound and crippling paranoia remains. I know nothing of the true nature of that wooded enclosure, the identity of the screaming person, or the ultimate demand of the man who stalked me. I am gripped by the absolute certainty that I came within a hair's breadth of being consumed by a terrifying, pre-planned atrocity that night. ## Story 2, The Vegas Desert Pickup, The Barren Passenger, lexically enhanced with horror. 2 years passed, my primary income stream derived from my work as a rideshare operator. Though I possessed dual credentials, the market in my Nevada city was dominated by Lyft, which became my chosen territory. The essential freedom of the profession precluded the imposition of any rigorous personal schedule. As a man in my mid-20s, my social habits often led to late hours, a rhythm that translated into the necessity of working long, nocturnal shifts whenever I needed to earn. This evening commenced as any other. I began driving around 11 p.m., completing a few routine fares before the arrival of a new booking. Operating during these extreme, desolate hours necessitated an absolute lack of selectivity. I was frequently the only car on the road, and requests were precious commodities. A declined or missed fare was a direct, punishing financial hit. I had developed a nearly autonomic response. A request appeared, I instantly accepted, and only then would I quickly verify the details of the distance and destination. It was almost always a predictable destination on the brightly lit Las Vegas Strip or the downtown nightlife area. Therefore, I executed my ritual flawlessly when the next request came, instant acceptance, followed by setting the course. It was approximately 10 minutes into the journey when a cold needle of awareness pricked me. The navigation was directing me away from the predictable hub of the Las Vegas Strip and the city's commercial core. I quickly reviewed the map and noted the coordinates pointed toward a genuinely anomalous location. Brief, illicit glances at the screen confirmed my suspicion. The pickup was deep in a region that appeared isolated, undeveloped, and fundamentally vacant. The strangeness was undeniable, but the idea of canceling, of throwing away the revenue, was intolerable. I reached the designated waypoint about 15 minutes later. The time was likely between 1:00 and 2 a.m. And the scene matched the map's desolate projection perfectly, a profoundly isolated ribbon of road bordered by nothing. There were no visible residences, no access roads, no paths, and not a single sign of human activity. My initial, hopeful rationalization, a car breakdown, dissolved as I scanned the absolute void. I pulled my vehicle securely to the roadside, messaged the customer through the app, and waited. The silence was the only response. No figures emerged, no reply was received. A profound, sinking sense of dread and wrongness began to consume my logic, compelling me to terminate the ride and flee. The wasted time was irritating, but the instinct to leave was overwhelming. I commenced my return journey toward the city's core, anticipating new fares. Yet, barely 5 minutes into my drive back, the app signaled a new order. It originated from almost the precise location I had just abandoned, perhaps a mile further along the desolate asphalt. This repetition, though superficially suspicious, failed to trigger full alarm. Location errors were common. I surmised the customer had immediately rebooked, and the location data had merely corrected itself. I brushed aside the lack of a reply as a minor eccentricity and accepted the order, relieved that the initial drive wouldn't be a complete excursion into futility. I made a sharp U-turn. I drove past the initial, abandoned site and proceeded a mile further. The landscape remained an uninterrupted vista of sparse, unforgiving desert scrub and low-lying, scrubby forest. However, upon reaching the new coordinates, my headlights illuminated a solitary male figure standing motionless at the road's edge. He was dressed in generic jeans and a pale gray hoodie, with a conspicuous duffel bag or backpack slung across his frame. As I braked before him, my eyes frantically searched the periphery. There was no possible origin point, no structures, no foot trails, no light pollution. The enigma of his presence here was instantaneous and unsettling. He opened the back door and entered the vehicle. The destination he had entered was a mere 5 minutes' drive away. I harbored a fervent, desperate hope that this destination would possess some semblance of rationality, but a quick glance at the map confirmed it was in an equally barren, uninhabited expanse. During the short, tense transit, the man maintained an absolute, unnerving silence. But his silence was compensated by an intense, continuous act of observation. Every time I risked a microglance into the rearview mirror, his eyes were already fixed, studying my face. A mounting, palpable tension saturated the cabin. Given the escalating series of oddities, I began to obsessively deconstruct everything: the reason for our location, his mysterious origin, and, most pressingly, the concealed contents of his duffel bag, details I would ordinarily dismiss entirely. A few charged minutes later, I reached the marked destination. It was a mirror image of the pickup spot, a complete zero point on the map of human activity. The moment the car stopped, the surrounding silence, amplified by the passenger's continued muteness, became a source of immediate, crippling terror. Before I could frame a question, the man's voice, devoid of inflection, cut through the oppressive atmosphere. "Exit the vehicle now," he stated. I snapped my head back, fear already tightening my throat, and found my worst intuition confirmed. He was already leveling a handgun directly at my chest, his eyes holding a horrifyingly dead, detached vacancy. He motioned toward the door with the muzzle and repeated the demand with a chilling finality. Compliance was the only option. I exited. He followed, positioning himself a calculated distance behind me, enough to negate any desperate attempt to resist. He then ordered me off the asphalt and into the unforgiving tangle of the desert forest. I launched into frantic, terrified pleas, offering money, the car, anything, but my words were consumed by the night. The man remained utterly silent, expressionless, betraying no trace of remorse or recognition. We proceeded deeper and deeper. The trees thickened, the darkness became a physical constraint. Time stretched into an eternity, but I estimate we walked a solid 10 minutes, plunging toward the unknown heart of the wilderness. Then, with an abruptness that made my heart seize, he commanded me to stop. I froze in place. I felt the absolute, cold certainty that my existence was terminating, that I was seconds away from becoming a missing person statistic. A desperate, primal wave of adrenaline overruled my paralysis. I lunged, breaking into a frantic sprint, plunging deeper into the trees. He roared, "Halt!" But I kept running. I exploited the utter darkness, knowing that the distance would soon render me an invisible quarry. His voice persisted, following me, until the silence was again ruptured by a violent, decisive gunshot. The ringing explosion of the bullet tore through the whole forest, followed by a silence so heavy it felt like suffocation. That was the end of the pursuit. I believe he fired the round in a final, impotent gesture of rage, acknowledging my narrow escape. From that moment, I simply moved, heedless of direction. My only tool, my phone, lay abandoned in the stolen vehicle. After a protracted, desperate scramble, I stumbled onto a minor track where I encountered a man who kindly assisted me. By the time law enforcement located the general area, my car and everything within it had been completely vanished. I am profoundly convinced this was never a simple car theft. They found no concrete evidence or trace of the assailant. Even the account he used on the app proved to be a final, frustrating digital mirage. I continued driving for a short period thereafter, but the app began to torment me. I received subsequent pickup requests near the exact, desolate coordinates of the attack. Each time, I alerted the authorities, only for them to report the area was empty upon arrival. Eventually, the corrosive effects of the sustained paranoia forced me to surrender the job, unable to face the roads that had become my hunting grounds. Story 3, the Seattle Townhome Intruder, the observer in the dark, lexically enhanced with horror. My weekend had been defined by a cold, persistent, drenching rainstorm in my Seattle townhome. I found a peculiar psychological solace in the deluge. It was a perfect, natural pretext for my decision to be entirely unproductive, the rain serving as an irrefutable alibi for my sloth. This sequence of events transpired on a Sunday. I was suffering from an inexplicable, overwhelming physical exhaustion, possibly a residual debt from a night of poor sleep. This fatigue chained me to the living room sofa for the entire day. By the time the dinner hour arrived, my energy reserves were entirely depleted. Around 10:00 p.m., I felt compelled to break my confinement and decided on a quick drive-through excursion. The rain was torrential, a near monsoon, and the roads were predictably deserted. My total absence lasted only 20 minutes. As I maneuvered my car back toward my unit, something immediately struck my attention as profoundly unnatural. Amidst the dense, swirling mist and the heavy downpour, and with all other neighboring townhomes cloaked in total darkness, a single, intensely conspicuous light was blazing from my upstairs bedroom window. I was certain this contradicted my routine. I habitually verify that all interior lights are extinguished before leaving. Crucially, I hadn't even been on the second floor all day. Yet, dominated by fatigue and focused intently on parking safely in the harsh weather, I failed to fully register the sign. I minimized the anomaly, failing to grasp its chilling significance until I was parked and the crucial line of sight was lost. I entered, activated the downstairs lighting, set my takeout down, and, with leaden feet, began to ascend the stairs to deal with the errant light. Reaching the top landing, my weariness vanished, replaced by a sudden, intense focus. Not only was the light in my bedroom not illuminated, but I could clearly see that the entire upstairs was dark. All doors were open, providing an unobstructed confirmation that every switch was in the off position. I stood for a disoriented moment, then cautiously stepped into the bedroom, scanning the void. I was lost in a cycle of immediate disbelief and self-doubt. I moved to the window and stared out at the rain and the dark street. I frantically searched for a logical explanation. Had my headlights created a brief, powerful reflection that deceived me? I bitterly regretted not pausing for a deliberate observation while pulling in, a moment that would have provided unassailable confidence. Now, I possessed no certainty. How could the light have been on, only to vanish in the seconds it took me to park and ascend? It must have been a fleeting optical illusion. I rubbed my eyes, attempting to dispel the psychological haze of exhaustion, and descended. I settled back on the couch and began to eat, the anxiety quickly receding into the background. I was so exhausted that I quickly dozed off while watching the screen. My sleep was a pattern of brief, shallow naps, each ending with an immediate, terrifying awakening. Each time I roused, I was overcome by an intense, visceral sense of exposure, the absolute conviction that unseen eyes were fixed upon me. I was compelled to constantly check the perimeter of the room and look over my shoulder. After several repetitions, the feeling became so acute that I rose and flooded the living room with light. However, the illumination failed to reach the furthest corner of the room, the shadowy nexus that connected to the main hallway and the stairwell. This area remained a persistent, unyielding pocket of shadow. This dark corner felt unnervingly magnetic, anchoring the feeling of intense surveillance. I got up again and switched on the hallway light. While I was up, I resolved to prepare for bed. I powered down the TV and cleaned up my food, then moved toward the stairwell. I swear, the precise instant my foot reached the lowest step, a light on the upper floor snapped off. I had not been aware that it was on until the sudden, palpable diminution of light registered, an unmistakable, terrifying sign originating from an upstairs room. A wave of absolute, sickening dread washed over me, yet an illogical compulsion forced me to continue up the steps. My mind was consumed by the impossibility of the event. I reached the landing and peered into the newly darkened room. The sound of rain against the roof was amplified, and the thin moonlight filtering through the window created an atmosphere of extreme psychological exposure. The feeling of being watched was now overwhelming. I was gripped by a physical chill as I took 2 steps inside and managed a weak, trembling, "Is anyone there?" Asterisk asterisk. I advanced further, then violently flipped the light switch. As the room was bathed in light, I looked back, seeing the clear spill of light into the hallway. This was the definitive, unassailable proof. As the terrifying pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind, a movement snagged my peripheral vision. It was the door of the bedroom closet. It cracked open infinitesimally, and through the gap, a pair of staring eyes met mine. We held contact for a sickening fraction of a second before the figure realized its concealment was breached. The man shoved the door open and emerged. He did not immediately charge or attack. Instead, he began walking slowly toward me, speaking rapidly, attempting to rationalize his presence and prevent my flight. His smile was a ghastly, deranged grimace, and his appearance was unkempt and profoundly unsettling, yet his approach held an unnatural, chilling familiarity. Before he could close the distance, I turned and sprinted back down the stairs and straight out of the front door. I fortunately still possessed my phone and immediately called the police. As I stood outside in the cold rain waiting, I saw the man rush out of my front door and disappear swiftly down the road. When the police arrived, they conducted a swift inquiry and discovered the method of entry. The back door lock and handle were completely mutilated and shattered. I had failed to notice this damage because I never used the back door. The fact that the man wasn't visibly wet confirmed he had been concealed inside my house for hours while I was downstairs. Nothing of value was stolen, leaving his motive for the break-in and subsequent hiding an absolute mystery. The manipulation of the lights remains the most chilling detail. There was a calculated, deliberate reason for him to be controlling the illumination. My sense of security is irrevocably shattered. The knowledge that he is still free and capable of such random, terrifying intrusions has rendered my home a place of perpetual anxiety. I hold to the desperate hope that this account will not require a terrifying addendum. Really scary stories, every day. Subscribe, like if you like, turn on the bell so you don't miss new videos.